Welcome. So good to be with you on this Wednesday as we get together for a little midweek Bible study and devotional time. And I'm so glad that you've taken some time out of your day to join us to do just that. As I often say, to talk about God's Word, to dive into God's Word and talk about it and see what He has for us, and hopefully be challenged and uplifted and encouraged by His words to us and the life that He calls us to live. As I was thinking about our lesson this week, what do you know? The question for you as we kind of start out, what do you know about your family story or your family history, your family ancestry? We have so many resources today to be able to research and to find out information about our family history, our family tree, our family ancestry. And I'm guessing that more than a few of you have done some research into your own family history. I'm also guessing that if you know much about your family history, you're probably like most families, that you have a good mix of some good men and women who did some good things, maybe even some great things for community, state, our world. And you've also probably got some not so great characters, right, in your family tree. And for most of us, the more that we examine the past, the more we realize that our family tree has its fair share of exciting stories, and maybe some humorous stories, maybe some really incredible stories, and then probably a few tragic and sad stories as well. But whatever the nature of the story, each one of them reveals something about the people in our family history that helped make us who we are today. The Bible blesses us with family histories, that what we call genealogies of key people in our spiritual heritage. These genealogies tell us something about our spiritual family, not our physical family, but our spiritual family. And for us as Gentile Christians, God grafted us into the family tree of Abraham, as Paul talks about in Romans chapter 11 and other places. While for a Jewish Christian, the Bible is both a story of faith and a story of their physical family as well. And so either way, we're all together. We're all under through Christ, we're under the umbrella of this same spiritual family. And so when the Bible lists these genealogies, these are the people who make up our spiritual family tree, because as Paul talks about in Galatians chapter 3, through Christ, we are all spiritual descendants of Abraham. And speaking of genealogies, the opening words of the very first book of the New Testament, Matthew, begins with a genealogy of the most important person, and that is Jesus. Matthew emphasizes Jesus' connection to Abraham and God's promise to bring redemption through one of Abraham's descendants. Matthew also emphasizes Jesus' relationship to a guy by the name of King David, we often know, and God's promise to deliver a king who would be David's descendant and reign on David's throne forever. Now, some thought that was a physical throne. Obviously, we know it is a spiritual throne that God is establishing, although one day it will be physical when He comes again. But ultimately, God fulfills both of those promises to Abraham and David by sending Jesus as the descendant of both of these great men. In fact, all of God's promises to Abraham and to David find their ultimate fulfillment in Jesus. And so Matthew lists the people in Jesus's family tree, and he does it in a very particular and calculated way, specifically by dividing the people in this list in Jesus' family tree into three groups of 14 generations: 14 from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile, and then 14 from the exile to the ultimate Messiah, to the Messiah, to Jesus. Now, on the surface, we may not gather some of the detailed information that comes underneath the surface of those things, but every devoted Jew at this time would know that there were more than 14 generations between Abraham to David, from David to the exile, from the exile to Jesus. They would know that there's more than 14 generations between those people in those time periods. But they also knew that Matthew was using numbers to say something significant. Hopefully we can get that as well. 7, as we often know, is the number of perfection or completion that we read in the Bible. We see 7 over and over again. It's always the number of perfection or completion. Each of these lists is 14. 14 is twice the number of the perfect number, right? And so the perfect number of generations almost is what Matthew is saying. Also, on top of that, there are 3 sections of the genealogy. So 3 sections, one from Abraham to David, one from David to the exile, and then one from the exile to the Messiah. So 3 sections of 14, right? 3 is often the number of divine perfection or divine completion. And so what Matthew, in essence, gives us is symbolic. 3 times, twice the number for a perfect genealogy. And I love just the insights that we can gain just from that little tidbit that Matthew gives us. But as you go through the list, one of the things you'll notice some remarkable truths and some remarkable stories, not the least of which is that while the genealogy, Matthew paints this genealogy as perfect, the people in it are very far from it. And Matthew doesn't sanitize the list in any way, shape, or form. He left in the scoundrels, the unfaithful, the wacky folks, the sinful ones. I mean, there are no hidden skeletons in Jesus's closet. Matthew chose to reveal all of the embarrassing ancestry, along with the heroes of faith and the victorious warriors, and even women who there's no reason in that day and age to include women in a genealogy. And yet Matthew does, and he shows some very particular and incredible women who won their way into God's story of redemption. And this genealogy reminds us of remarkable faith, both of Jews and Gentiles, of righteous people and people having questionable moral history. And it's Matthew's way of saying, in essence, don't miss who's on the list. Because if you do, you will miss what Jesus is doing and how he comes to bring us to God, no matter what our pedigree or our background or our race or our gender. Because Jesus's genealogy is full of real people with real issues in whom faith triumphed and through whom God kept his promises. So why is knowing all this about Jesus's family tree so important for us? Well, Matthew shows us the good news of God even before he tells us the story of Jesus, right? I mean, we're in Matthew chapter 1 and we read all these names. If you can go back and read them if you like, but we haven't even gotten to the story of Jesus yet. He's not even born yet. And Matthew does this by showing us the people that God has used to get us to Jesus. And that's not just good news for some of us. That's great news for all of us. We read this list and we know we belong. No matter our backgrounds, no matter our victories, no matter our failures, we can find someone like us in Jesus' ancestry. And as we read about their stories, we realize that these are our stories too. Stories of victory, stories of failure, and ultimately stories of redemption. And we belong to Jesus' family, not just because we've been reborn as God's children, but also because God takes people like them and like us and brings redemption to them and through them, through Jesus. Hope you have a blessed day. God bless.